So what is Power Automate? So Power Automate is an application tool to build automations. So it is a Microsoft tool. It is part of the Power Platform, along with some of the other tools in the Power Platform, which would be Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Pages. The workflows or the flows that we build are referred to as flows or cloud flows. So you'll probably hear Eric and I a few times describe Power Automates as flows or cloud flows. They mean the same thing. So again, it's the tool to build automation. Um, so the cool thing about Power Automate is it's not a specific tool that's Dynamics or even specific to the Power Platform itself. It's kind of agnostic. Yes, in Eric and my world, we do a lot with Power Automate in Dynamics customer engagement, um, but it is agnostic. So you can use this tool for checking incoming Outlook emails, SharePoint records or SharePoint documents. If we need to automate something in there. And there's really a million different things that we could be doing with Power Automate. We sometimes build Power Automates or workflows to move data from one system to another. So Power Automate need to talk to two or more different systems. So that's a common thing as well. So again, it's really that automation engine. Some examples of Power Automates is sending an email notification. So if something happened in our process or some environment and we need an email notification to go out. Or we might want to create or update some records in a database, whether that be Dynamics or any other database. We kind of mentioned this earlier, but we can move or copy data from one system to another. We can also create approval processes around a process that you might have in one of your applications. So the two here that you see that have an asterisk next to them, email notifications and create approval process, are the actual examples that Eric and I are going to show you today. Before we do that, there are just some core concepts that we need to cover in the Power Automate world. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is there's some different types of Power Automates or different types of flows that can be built, and they all kind of have their purpose. And then within a Power Automate or a flow, there's this concept of triggers, actions, and connections. So we'll talk about that. So first, we're going to talk about the different types of flows. So we have automated flows, and we have instant flows, and we have scheduled flows. Those are all kind of built the same way. I think they kind of make sense. Automation is going to run off something that happens in a database or something like that. An instant flow is we're going to design a button that somebody's going to click, and then that is going to run the flow or whatever we tell the flow to do. And then scheduled flow is something that we would schedule to run, let's say nightly or multiple times a day. So those are the three most common types of flows, and building those is very, very similar. There's other flows called desktop flows, and that's used to automate like a daily repeatable task that you would do on your desktop. Almost like, hey, I'm going to record a bunch of clicks that I do every day. It's the same clicking and things that I'm doing every day. You can record that as a desktop flow and run that. That always reminds me of back in the day in Microsoft Excel, you could build like a macro. And then when you recorded that macro, it was recording your different clicks and things like that. And that's kind of similar to the concept around a desktop flow. And then another type of flow is what's called a business process flow. Some of you that are users of Dynamics 365 customer engagement are probably familiar with this, but that's a visual guided, sometimes we refer to as a ribbon up on the top of the screen that guide users through a particular process. And so that's just a different type of flow. So today, Eric and I are going to focus mainly on those automated flows. But again, I just want you to be aware of there's different types of flows out there. Triggers. So every single flow starts with a trigger. Okay, so basically a trigger is what's going to start my flow off. And this is going to be most important in an automated flow. So what's going to be that thing that's going to start that flow? Don't need to necessarily worry about that on a scheduled flow or an on-demand flow, because I'm going to click a button to start it. But for those that are an automated flow, what is going to be that thing that's going to trigger that flow to run? So some examples are like, hey, when a record or an item is created in a database or modified in a database. So that could be a database or a SharePoint item or a document gets created or modified that could trigger flows. Or how about when an email arrives in your inbox? That could trigger a flow to evaluate that email and do something with it. How about when a file is simply added to a folder? Hey, this file's appeared in a folder. I need these automations to happen. Those are some examples of triggers. Actions is the workhorse of Power Automate. So actions is what's going to happen once that trigger happens, right? And so all flows have at least one action. Some flows have many actions, but so every flow has a trigger and at least one action. And there are 1,000 of actions available with all different kinds of connectors. And we'll talk about connectors in just a second here. But some examples of actions are, hey, I need to create or update a different type of record in a database. Or I need to create a new document from this template that I've created and then save that document in a specific folder or specific area in SharePoint. Or maybe I need to email that document out. I can send emails, I can send text messages, I can send push notifications and applications using an action in a flow. And again, there's many, many thousands of different actions that could be run. But actions are tied to and triggers as well are also tied to what's called a connector. So connectors are the different tools that we would use Power Automate in. And Microsoft gives us hundreds, I haven't done a count recently, it might even be thousands at this point, of out-of-the-box connectors. And this slide here is just going to give you kind of that visual of all the different types of connectors that are available to you. And if there wasn't one out here for whatever application you're trying to build an automation in, there's this thing called building a custom connector that you could do as well. So that's what a connector is, but connectors are kind of like, hey, I'm going to trigger a flow based off of a Microsoft Dataverse or Dynamics database action. That would be a connector would be the Dataverse. If I want to monitor something in Outlook, Outlook would be the connector. So those are connectors.